The hush that fell over the archery field was deafening. Everyone froze, eyes wide, expressions locked in disbelief. Callum Ward, 5-time national champion, slowly turned his head toward the unassuming woman standing at the line next to him. His perfectly composed face cracked with confusion as he stared at her target, a perfect bullseye that had split his own arrow down the middle. The scoreboard flashed with impossible numbers. She'd just broken his standing record with her very first competitive shot. Sarah Chun stood motionless, bow still raised, her weathered hands trembling slightly. The whispers started like wildfire, rushing through the crowd. "Who is she? Did you see that? That's impossible." The tournament officials hurried over, verifying what everyone had witnessed. Sarah lowered her bow, her eyes never leaving the target, as if she couldn't believe it herself. The champion archer's face hardened as he realized every camera had shifted away from him to capture the unknown woman who'd just become the story of the day. Before we continue, if you enjoy incredible underdog stories that will leave you inspired, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. 6 months earlier, Sarah Chun parked her rusted pickup truck outside the Silver Lake Archery Club, pulling her late father's bow case from the passenger seat. At 42, she looked older than her years. Deep lines etched around her eyes from squinting into the sun during decades of farm work, calloused hands that had never known manicures. Her graying hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. As she approached the entrance, a group of younger archers in sleek athletic wear and expensive equipment stepped around her without a glance, too engrossed in their conversation about the upcoming regional qualifiers to notice her. Sarah hesitated at the door, almost turning back. It had been 25 years since she'd last picked up a bow, before her father died, before she had to take over the family farm, before life swallowed her dreams whole. The receptionist looked up as Sarah approached the counter, her practiced smile faltering slightly as she took in Sarah's appearance. "Can I help you?" she asked, a hint of doubt in her voice. "I'd like to sign up for a membership," Sarah replied, her voice soft but steady. "It's been a while since I've shot, but I'd like to start again." The receptionist nodded, sliding a form across the counter. "Beginners classes are on Tuesdays and Thursdays. You'll need your own equipment, though we have rental options for newcomers." Sarah placed her father's worn bow case on the counter. "I have my own, thank you." When Sarah stepped onto the practice range that afternoon, she felt every eye on her. The club was filled with serious archers, college athletes, competition shooters, and several who wore the logo of the elite Silver Lake select team. Their bows were modern compounds with stabilizers, precision sights, and carbon arrows that cost more than Sarah's monthly grocery budget. She found an empty lane at the far end of the range, away from the clusters of archers. With reverent care, she unzipped her father's case and removed the recurve bow he'd hand-carved decades ago. The wood was smooth from years of use, the grip worn to the exact shape of his hand. Sarah ran her fingers along its length, remembering how he taught her to shoot when she was just a child, how natural it had felt to draw back the string and find that perfect moment of stillness before release. From a nearby lane, Lucas Merritt, assistant coach of the Silver Lake select team, glanced over and barely suppressed a laugh. "Museum piece you've got there," he called out, loud enough for others to hear. Several archers snickered. Sarah didn't respond. She strung the bow with practiced movements that her muscles somehow remembered despite the years. She selected an arrow from her father's old quiver, nocked it, and took her stance. The first shot missed the target completely. The second hit the outer ring. By her fist arrow, she had adjusted her form, recalibrating her body to the memory of proper technique. The arrow landed just outside the bullseye. "Not bad for an antique," Lucas remarked, his surprise poorly disguised beneath the condescension. Sarah retrieved her arrows and continued practicing, each shot bringing her closer to the center of the target. By the time she packed up 3 hours later, her arms aching from the unaccustomed exertion, she'd found something she thought she'd lost forever: purpose. Over the following weeks, Sarah established a ritual. She would arrive at the club each day after finishing her farm chores, practice until her fingers were raw, then return home to apply her father's homemade salve to her blistered hands before falling into exhausted sleep. She spoke little, kept to herself, and focused entirely on rediscovering her form. The other archers largely ignored her, occasionally casting curious or dismissive glances her way, all except for Ellie Jean, a 16-year-old prodigy who had been watching Sarah with quiet interest. One afternoon, when the club was nearly empty, Ellie approached Sarah's lane. "Your draw is really smooth," she said, startling Sarah, who had been lost in concentration. "Traditional archers usually have a more jerky release, but yours is like water." Sarah lowered her bow, surprised by the compliment. "My father taught me. He always said that the moment before release should feel like the pause between heartbeats." "That's beautiful," Ellie replied. "I'm Ellie. I'm training for the Junior Nationals next month." "Sarah," she responded with a small smile. "I'm training to remember who I used to be." Their unlikely friendship began that day. Ellie would often practice in the lane beside Sarah, occasionally offering modern technical advice, while Sarah shared her father's wisdom about the more spiritual aspects of archery. The older archers, including Lucas and his select team, watched their interactions with bemused indifference. One evening, as the club was closing, Callum Ward himself made an appearance. The national champion was visiting to run a special workshop for elite members the following day. His presence created a buzz of excitement, with many archers lingering to catch a glimpse of him. Sarah, focused on her final shots, didn't notice him until he was standing behind her, watching her release 3 arrows in quick succession, all within the innermost ring. "Interesting technique," he commented as she lowered her bow. "Old school, but effective." Sarah turned, surprised to find the famous archer studying her form. "Thank you," she said simply. Callum nodded toward her bow. "Family heirloom?" "My father's. He was a bowyer." "You've got natural talent," he observed, though his tone suggested it was despite her equipment rather than because of it. "You should consider upgrading if you want to shoot competitively. No one wins with traditional gear anymore." Before Sarah could respond, Lucas approached, eager to speak with the champion. "Callum, we've got dinner reservations with the club director. We should head out." Callum gave Sarah a parting nod before walking away with Lucas, who leaned in to whisper something that made them both laugh. Sarah watched them go, a familiar determination settling in her chest. The same feeling she'd had as a young girl when people told her that archery was a man's sport. That night, as Sarah drove home, Ellie's words echoed in her mind. The girl had been encouraging her to enter the upcoming Open Regional Tournament. "You're better than half the competitive archers already," Ellie had insisted. "You could qualify for state championships if you wanted to." Sarah had dismissed the idea, but now, after her brief encounter with Callum Ward, she found herself considering it. She pulled into her farmhouse driveway and sat in her truck, staring at the moonlit fields her family had worked for generations. The farm was struggling, barely breaking even most years. The prize money from tournaments wouldn't be life-changing, but it might be enough to fix the irrigation system that had been failing for the past 2 seasons. More than that, though, Sarah realized she wanted to honor her father's legacy, not just by preserving the farm, but by reclaiming the passion they had shared. She wanted to show that his craftsmanship, his philosophy, his bow still had value in a world that had moved on to carbon fiber and computer-calibrated sights. The next morning, Sarah called the tournament organizers and registered as an independent archer. When Ellie heard the news, she was ecstatic. "I knew you'd do it. We can train together." Sarah's training intensified. She set up targets on her property to practice at dawn and dusk, in addition to her sessions at the club. She studied videos of recent competitions, noting techniques and strategies. She repaired and reinforced her father's bow, replacing the string and meticulously checking every inch for weak points. Word spread through the club about her registration. Most reactions were dismissive. "She's got no chance with that museum piece," Lucas told his team. "It's almost insulting to the serious competitors." Others were more curious than critical, wondering what had prompted the quiet woman to suddenly enter the competitive arena. A few, including Ellie, believed she might surprise everyone. As the tournament approached, Sarah's confidence wavered. During a practice session where she was particularly struggling with consistency, Lucas and his team occupied the lanes next to her, their precision making her occasional misses feel magnified. "Don't get discouraged tomorrow when you're outclassed," Lucas said as he packed up his equipment. "Participation is what matters for beginners." Sarah's hands tightened around her bow as she watched him walk away, laughing with his teammates. She stayed long after they left, shooting until the manager told her they were closing. Her last 3 arrows formed a perfect triangle in the bullseye. The morning of the tournament dawned clear and cool. Sarah arrived early, her stomach in knots as she observed the professional setup, the multiple competition fields, electronic scoring systems, and archers in sponsored uniforms warming up with practiced routines. She checked in at the registration desk, receiving lane assignments and a competitor number to pin to her shirt, a plain navy button-up, the closest thing to athletic where she owned. As she made her way to the warm-up area, she heard a familiar voice call her name. Ellie rushed over, already in her competition gear. "You came," the teenager exclaimed. "I was afraid you might change your mind." Sarah managed a nervous smile. "Almost did. 3 times on the drive here." "Well, I'm glad you didn't," Ellie said, then lowered her voice. "Callum Ward is here. He's doing some exhibition shots during the lunch break. Everyone's freaking out." Sarah nodded, trying to focus on her own preparation rather than the intimidating presence of the champion. She found a quiet corner to assemble her equipment and center herself, going through the mental exercises her father had taught her to calm her mind before competition. The qualifying rounds began at 9 a.m. sharp. Sarah was assigned to a group that included several experienced competitors, including Lucas. When he saw her approach, his eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "You actually showed up," he remarked. "Brave of you." Sarah took her position at the line without responding. The tournament official gave the instructions, and at the signal, the first round began. Sarah's first few shots were tight with tension, landing in the outer rings. As the round progressed, she found her rhythm, her scores improving with each end. By the lunch break, she had qualified for the elimination rounds, not with a top score, but comfortably within the cutoff. Ellie found her during the break, bouncing with excitement. "You made it, and you beat 3 members of the select team." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. 1 round at a time. The afternoon brought the elimination matches, head-to-head competition where archers shot simultaneously, with the higher scorer advancing. Sarah's first opponent was a college athlete with state-level credentials. The young woman looked at Sarah's traditional bow with poorly concealed disdain. To everyone's surprise, including her own, Sarah won by a comfortable margin. Her next match pitted her against one of Lucas's teammates, who had placed highly in previous regional tournaments. Again, Sarah prevailed, her arrows consistently finding the inner rings while her opponent struggled with the mounting pressure. Word began to spread around the venue about the unknown woman with the wooden bow who was quietly advancing through the brackets. Spectators drifted toward her matches, curious about this anomaly in the tournament. By late afternoon, Sarah found herself in the semifinals, facing Lucas himself. His initial amusement had turned to grim determination. "Beginner's luck only gets you so far," he said as they took their positions. "This is where experience counts." The match was close. Lucas shot with technical perfection, his groupings tight and centered. But Sarah shot with something that couldn't be measured by modern metrics, a fluid harmony between archer, bow, and target that her father had instilled in her. When the final scores were tallied, Sarah had won by a single point. Lucas couldn't hide his shock and embarrassment. "That bow shouldn't even be allowed in competition," he muttered as he stalked away. The unexpected run of the unknown archer had become the story of the tournament. A small crowd gathered for the final match, where Sarah would face the top seed, a former Olympic alternate with multiple regional championships to his name. As Sarah prepared for the final, Ellie appeared at her side. "Everyone's talking about you," she whispered excitedly. "Even Callum Ward was asking who you are." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to stay focused. "Just one more match," she said, more to herself than to Ellie. The final was shot arrow by arrow, with scores announced after each end. Sarah's opponent was formidable, his precision honed through years of elite training. But with each shot, Sarah felt more connected to her father's presence, as if his hands were guiding hers. The scores remained close throughout the match, neither archer able to build a significant lead. As they approached the final end, they were tied. 3 arrows would determine the champion. Sarah's opponent shot first. 10, 9, 10, nearly perfect. When Sarah stepped to the line, a hush fell over the crowd. She knocked her first arrow, drew back the string, and in that suspended moment between heartbeats, she released. 10. Second arrow, breeze, draw, release. 10. For her final arrow, Sarah closed her eyes briefly, feeling the bow as an extension of herself. When she opened them, her vision seemed clearer than it had ever been. She drew, held, and released in one fluid motion. 10, dead center. The crowd erupted in applause as the scoreboard confirmed what they had witnessed. Sarah Chun, the unknown archer with the handcrafted bow, had won the regional championship. As officials prepared for the award ceremony, Callum Ward approached her, his expression a mixture of curiosity and admiration. "Remarkable shooting," he said, extending his hand. "I've never seen anyone use traditional equipment with such precision at this level." Sarah shook his hand, still processing her victory. "It's not about the equipment," she said. "It's about connection to the bow, to the target, to the tradition." Callum nodded thoughtfully. "Most modern archers never experience that. They're too focused on the technology." He glanced at her bow. "Would you mind if I tried it?" Surprised by the request, Sarah handed him her father's bow. Callum tested its weight, drew it back experimentally, and nodded with appreciation. "Beautiful balance. Your father was a master craftsman." "He was," Sarah agreed softly. "You know," Callum said, returning the bow, "the national qualifiers are in 3 months. With your talent, you could make a serious impact, especially with your unique approach. It would be good for the sport to be reminded of its roots." Before Sarah could respond, they were called for the award ceremony. As she stood on the top step of the podium, medal around her neck, holding a winner's check that would fix her irrigation system and more, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. The local media swarmed her afterward, eager for the story of the farmer-turned-champion. Sarah spoke briefly about her father, his craftsmanship, and their shared love of archery. When asked about her future plans, she smiled and said simply, "The national qualifiers are in 3 months. I have a lot of practicing to do." In the weeks that followed, Sarah's life transformed. The story of her victory went viral in archery communities. Equipment manufacturers offered sponsorships, which she politely declined, preferring to honor her father by continuing to use his bow. The Silver Lake Archery Club proudly promoted her as a member, suddenly finding value in the traditional approach they had previously dismissed. Lucas eventually approached her during a practice session, his earlier contempt replaced by grudging respect. "Your form is impeccable," he admitted. "If you're interested, I know some techniques that might help with consistency at longer distances." Sarah accepted his olive branch with grace. "I'd appreciate that, and maybe I can show you a few things about intuitive shooting." Ellie's parents invited Sarah to dinner to thank her for mentoring their daughter, who had placed 3rd in her junior division at the same tournament. Over homemade dumplings, Ellie announced her decision to learn traditional archery alongside her modern technique. "I want to understand the soul of it, like Sarah does," she explained. As Sarah trained for the national qualifiers, she transformed part of her farm into an archery range, offering lessons to local children who had been inspired by her story. The income helped stabilize her farm finances, and the joy of passing on her father's knowledge brought healing to a part of her that had been dormant for decades. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Sarah stood at the shooting line she'd built on her property, her father's bow in hand. She reached into her quiver and found only 1 arrow remaining. Taking her stance, she drew back the string and held the position, feeling the perfect balance between tension and release that her father had described as the archer's paradox. In that moment, Sarah understood that her victory wasn't just about proving others wrong. It was about proving herself right. It was about honoring the past while creating a future where tradition and innovation could coexist, where an old wooden bow could still hit the center of a target in a world of carbon fiber and computer calculations. She released the arrow and watched it fly true, splitting the fading light before finding its mark. A perfect bullseye. Which brings us back to that hushed moment at the National Championships, 6 months after Sarah first walked into the Silver Lake Archery Club, standing next to Callum Ward himself, having just broken his record with her first competitive shot at the national level. Sarah Chen had completed her journey from forgotten to unforgettable. As cameras flashed and the crowd's murmurs grew to excited chatter, Callum leaned over and asked quietly, "How does it feel?" Sarah looked at her father's bow, then at the scoreboard, and finally at the crowd of young archers watching her with newfound admiration. She smiled and answered with the words her father had said to her after her first perfect shot as a child. "It feels like remembering who I always was." The national championship would last 3 more days, with many arrows yet to be shot. But in that moment, Sarah had already won something far more valuable than any trophy. She had reclaimed her passion, honored her father's legacy, and shown that sometimes the most powerful innovation is remembering what we've forgotten. And as she prepared for her second shot, the whispers around the field had transformed from, "Who is she?" to, "That's Sarah Chen," spoken with the reverence reserved for those who change not just competitions, but the very spirit of their sport. Her second arrow joined the first in the center of the target, and Sarah knew this was just the beginning of her second chance, her redemption, her resurrection as the archer she was always meant to be.